Welcome to the Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning. We are in for a very, very special program with Rabbi Jeffrey Segelman. The program is Psalms, an Ancient and Modern Conversation with God. Let's chat. Go ahead, Rav Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great honor. I am so sorry that I'm not in Florida to be with you. It's for those of you who came late. I mean, on a whole bunch of levels, I wanted to be in Florida, but now that it's like 0 degrees in New York, I really want to be in Florida. But another time we will have to do it, and please God, we'll all be healthy and get through this as long as it takes, and still be healthy, and then join together in Florida. But I do thank him for the invitation, and we're going to study the Psalms. And for those of you who are used to studying with me on Friday mornings, this is going to be a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. What I'd like to do is learn with you until about 9 o'clock tonight, but we'll take a break. We'll study for about an hour, and then we'll take a break because people sometimes get hungry or they need to go use the facilities or whatever. And then we'll come back about halfway through. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll study till 9, because there's really there's a lot to do. And I'm going to share the screen. When I spoke to Kim yesterday, she had a great idea, which I'm not going to end up doing, which was to start with a bit of a meditation. But I started to write one, and I realized it's going to take too much time, and that it will be faster if I simply teach for a few minutes the meditation, the ideas of the meditation. They'll be clearer. We'll do it faster, and then we can jump into the Psalms themselves. We're not going to study, kind of from an academic point of view, what are the Psalms, who wrote them, where did they come from? For our purposes tonight, the only thing we need to know is that in the Bible, there is a book of Psalms. And in the book of Psalms, there are 150 Psalms. For the most part, there's no particular rhyme or reason to the order or to the Psalms themselves. You can't say that, if you could learn Psalm 21 before you learn Psalm 6. And for the most part, it won't make a difference. They each stand as quite independent units, not much determined by the other. And they are of no systematic theme. Some Psalms are great praises of God. Some other Psalms express great anger toward God. Some Psalms express victory, and other Psalms are in the depths of depression. They run the gamut of emotions. They run the gamut of thoughts about God. So you can't look at them and say, oh, the Psalms say this, or the Psalms say that. The Psalms say everything. But now let's kind of look at what I made a few notes before we get into the Psalms, and I'm going to read them with you and discuss them with you. Please interrupt me if you have a question or a comment, because I can't see you, so don't raise your hand. Either use the raise hand thingy on your screen, or just interrupt.
Rabbi, can you enlarge a little before we go?
The best I can do is that.
Oh, that's a good help. Thank you.
The Psalms are ancient poetry. Okay, they are ancient. That's important. And they are poetry. That's important. Which means like medieval poetry that you study when you might study now, that you studied in college. The words have to be very carefully examined and considered. Rarely will a person grasp the full meaning and spiritual power in the first or even the second. And if I had more room, I would write the third, the fourth, the fifth, or the sixth reading. Psalms need to be studied because they are poetry and they are ancient. They're not talking our language per se, and they're poetic. So we can't just expect the psalm to jump out at us and say, whoa, here it is. As a tool for, and this is very important, as a tool for personal spiritual growth, the Psalms should be considered a starting point, not an end. The Psalms allow us to overhear the words of the psalmist, and in some cases, find language that suits us, meaning sometimes we can read a psalm, and we'll talk about the language of the Psalms in a minute, but sometimes we'll read a psalm and we'll say, oh, that language is beautiful, and we'll adopt that language. I always wanted to say this to God. I always wanted to say this to my lover, and then quote the psalm, because sometimes the Psalms are just great in giving us the exact words that we want. But more often than not, we're presented with thoughts that we can transform into our own words. Okay, so the very first psalm we're going to look at is Psalm 23, and you know how it begins. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Now, very few people will ever say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But people will say, my life depends so much on God, and God has been so good to me. Same idea. But we would never say, God is my shepherd. That's just not how we speak. So sometimes we'll find the words, but other times the Psalms will give us the thought that we can translate into our own words to God or to someone else. Sometimes the Psalms will give us permission to speak to God in ways that we may not have considered. Okay, as we'll see tonight, a very frustrated and angry psalmist screams for God to wake up. God is sleeping. You must be sleeping. You can't possibly be seeing what's happening to me. Okay, that's not generally language that we think we have permission to say. So sometimes the psalmist gives us that language. But here's the important, that's why I underlined it. Psalms are not intended to change how we feel. They give us the words and inspiration by which we can respond to how we feel. Psalms are not medicine. Psalms are not even really a mantra. If I am feeling sad and depressed, if I'm feeling thankful, if I'm feeling angry, and I want to express that to God, it's rare that I will pull out a psalm and quote it, but the psalmist gives us ideas. The psalmist gives us a word, a phrase, so that we can use our language. People often open up the Psalms and they expect the Psalms to change how they feel. Psalms don't really change how we feel. Psalms give us the greatest, probably, of the tools to express how we're feeling and to work on changing it ourselves. Okay? The Psalms, for the most part, are a dialogue with God. Theologically, God is presumed to be other than the speaker, and for the most part, more powerful and understanding than the speaker. Now, if that's your theology, that there is a God exists, and that God is not me, it's not even in me, that God is outside of me, that God is a God to whom I can dialogue, with whom I can dialogue, that God is like the other person that I might have just had a conversation with. The difference being that the assumption is that this is not a conversation between equals. Now, that may not be your theology. By the way, I'm not even sure that's my theology. But I'm just telling this to you because we can't, it's very hard to put 21st century theology or ideology into words that are 3,500 years old. So we have to see them for what they are and where they come from. And then we can start to tweak it so that it becomes ours. But we can't be immediately turned off because it doesn't speak to us. Well, of course it doesn't speak to us because it's really old. And it might be coming from a different theological place. Something that we're going to see in a few minutes. Always look to see who is speaking and to whom. Sometimes the speaker is the psalmist. Sometimes it's God. Sometimes the speaker is directing the words to God, but just as often to an audience of one or more. Okay, that the psalm is not really a dialogue with God. It is a dialogue with another person or an audience about God. Often we find meaning in seeing ourselves as the speaker. But sometimes we should try to see ourselves as the audience. And finally, very often, the psalmist feels distant from God. It is always important to note whether it is God who is distant from the psalmist or whether it is the psalmist who is distant from God. Okay, so I'm I'm not being at all judgmental. I'm just being factual in my experience as a rabbi. That when people would come for spiritual counseling and would talk about the great distance that they felt between themselves and God, very often they were asking me how they can bring God closer. And in fact, what they should have been asking me is how they can bring themselves closer. That they were on the working assumption that where they were was fine, and that somehow God had to draw closer to them, and it was within my power to get God to draw closer to me, when in fact, they really had never considered the fact that it wasn't God that distanced God's self from them. It was they who distanced themselves from God. And it's no longer a question of how do I bring God closer, but how do I move in my life so that I am closer to God? And the Psalms will have both. They will have the person who feels completely validated and that somehow God has distanced himself from them. More often than not, we'll see that it's a person who has distanced themselves from God and is trying to wonder whether God will take them back and how they get back. So far, so good. We're about to jump into a psalm. So good. I don't hear any, I can't see you, so don't think I can see the expression on your face, because I can't. All right. Maybe the most famous of all psalms, right? Everybody's heard this. Unless you are fortunate enough to have never been at a funeral. You've heard this. Let's look. Now, I'm going to tell you, it might be a little frustrating because I want to accomplish, I think, 6 Psalms tonight. So that's hard to do in one class. So we're going to try. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Okay, first, who's talking? The psalmist is talking. The psalmist could be you. The psalmist could be your child, your parent, your lover, but it's a person. Okay, let's just say it's you. Who's being addressed? You can interrupt and answer these questions. It makes them more fun.
If people want to unmute and the backgrounds are quiet, we have room for conversation.
Yeah, it's better if you unmute. That way we can talk. Who's being addressed? Who is this?
Anyone who's listening.
Anyone's listening. Okay, there's somebody being addressed. This person is talking to another person. This person is not talking to God, which is obvious from the language. The Lord is my shepherd. I'm telling my friends something about my relationship with God. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me to water in places of repose. He renews my soul and guides me in right paths as befits his name. Okay. It's nice, right?
It's describing what a shepherd would do.
Right. And the person is suggesting that he is a sheep.
Right.
Right. Now, let me ask you, do you want to be a sheep?
No.
I don't either. Okay.
Americans never want to be a sheep.
Sheep is pretty much the stupidest animal that walks the face of the earth. A sheep is completely dependent. A sheep cannot survive. A sheep will walk up to the wolf and say hi. Okay, a sheep will walk off a cliff. Okay, a sheep is in complete and total dependence to its survival on the shepherd. And yet here, the psalmist says, the Lord is my shepherd. Now, and so from a kind of intellectual, maybe even emotional point of view, being a sheep isn't the best thing in the world. On the other hand, and now I have to tell you, I can't multitask. So if you're chatting and you expect me to see it, I can't see it. I will see it in the recording, but I won't see it now. Okay. On the other hand, I lack nothing. I lack nothing. I have everything I need. My life is great. Now, I lack nothing because I'm really not smart enough to know what else is out there, but I know that I don't envy anyone. I'm not jealous of anyone. I don't feel like there's anything wrong in my life. I lie down in green pastures. I drink fresh water. My soul, if a sheep is aware of its soul, but my life, my whole being, day to day, it's a beautiful day. And I'm not worried about getting in trouble. I'm going to follow the right paths. Why? Because the shepherd's going to take me there, as befits his name. This is a remarkable statement. That means, and the best part, the sheep would say, is that it's not even because of me, that how well I'm being taken care of has absolutely nothing to do with me. It has to do with the fact that the shepherd is the shepherd. And the shepherd has to do this because it's his responsibility, it's his reputation, it's his essence. He has to take care of me. If I'm annoying, he's still going to take care of me. It's beautiful. Okay. There's an upside to this, as the psalmist obviously believes. But there's still that problem that in order to have this, got to be a sheep. Let's go on. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with us. You are with me. Okay, let's see who got it. What happened in this verse?
Things aren't also good.
Well, but I just look at the grammar. This is like Psalms
Person
101.
changed. He's
The
now
person
speaking.
changed. Yeah. He's not talking to his friend anymore.
Oh,
He's talking to God. Though I walk through a valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Okay. And this, by the way, this, if we're trying to draw spiritual lessons from the Psalms, that spiritual growth lies not only in our ability to communicate with God in some way that makes us satisfied, but it's our ability to communicate with a kind of spiritual chavrusa, with a friend, with an audience, with a companion, with a lover, to share thoughts about God. And we have to move back and forth from talking to God and talking about God. Anyone who is familiar with the structure of Jewish prayer, whether it's, no matter what service I guess if not Musaf or Mincha, but the morning service or the evening service, whether it's on a weekday or Shabbat, you have this sense too, that a lot of the prayers, we're not talking to God, we're talking about God. But then they end with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God. After I've just spent the last minute talking about you, suddenly I address you, and then I go back and talk about you. And then I come back and talk to you. And then we get to the Amida, where I take 3 steps forward and I'm entirely talking to you. So this back and forth is a fundamental aspect of spiritual growth. We talk to God, we talk about God. You have to have both. But in verse 4, he leaves his friend, or his friend's attention, his attention to his friend, and he talks to God. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now, somebody said appropriately, not so nice anymore. I was in, the water in places of repose and green pastures, and now look where I am. I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but even when I'm in that kind of place, I fear no harm. I'm not scared because you are with me. Okay, that when things were good, God was please forgive my pronouns and the sexism of my pronouns. I don't mean to suggest that God is a man, but I'm just used to saying him. When things were good, God was a him. When things were scary, the fear was overcome by the ability to draw closer to God so that God becomes a you. I'm not scared because you're here. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And again, think of those words. Rods and staffs are not generally things that we think of as providing comfort. On the contrary, what happens what happens to the sheep with the shepherd and the rod? Gets patched.
Oh.
You hit the sheep. The sheep's going in the wrong direction, so you patch the sheep so that the sheep changes direction. But the sheep here is saying, when I'm scared, I'm not going to, when I'm in a dangerous place, when I'm in a scary place, I'm not going to have fear because you're not going to let me get in trouble. You're not going to let that happen. You have a rod, you have a staff. And even though you patch me, even though, you have to hit me, but I know it's to make sure that I'm going in the right direction and I'm going to stay out of harm's way. Let's go on. You spread a table for me in full view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My drink is abundant. Only goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, what just happened here? Okay, still talking to God, but what transformed starting in verse 5?
I'm out of the, I'm no longer in that valley.
Yeah, and I'm no longer a
Sheep.
I'm no longer a sheep. Sheep don't sit at the table. Sheep don't get their heads anointed with oil. Sheep don't have a big cup of wine. All of a sudden, I'm not a sheep anymore. I'm a human being.
And the quality of the caretaking is different.
The quality of the caretaking is remarkably different. It's remarkably different. Okay, but notice here, I started as a sheep. I walked through the valley of death, valley of the shadow of death, in which my relationship to you actually grew closer. And when I came out of this, presumably, when I came out of this valley of the shadow of death, I'm not a sheep anymore. I'm a human being. And now you're not bringing me to green pastures and to fresh water. You are setting a table for me in full view of my enemies. Now, it's never clear what that means. A lot of times the Psalms will talk about the enemies, the bad guys. For all I know, they were real bona fide bad guys that were being mentioned here. I think that the safest way, not the safest way, but the way to interpret enemies and Barbara, I'll call on you 1 second. The best way to interpret enemies when you're reading a psalm, particularly if you're doing it for spiritual growth, is to read this as my demons. The enemy is that which in me is pushing me the wrong way. Okay, the thing that will harm me, it's my capacity to harm myself. In Hebrew, we might say it's the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that all of us have. Barbara, go ahead.
Well, what struck me as you're talking about the shift from sheep to person sitting is that by drawing closer to God, by relying on God, allowed for that transformation, because there was, for whatever the reason, that there was this drawing closer to God and trusting, and therefore allowed me to be more of myself and to be more free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna take your point and jump into the point that I was gonna make next, because we do see this transition, and one of the ways that I like to think about this, it's not one that necessarily speaks to spiritual growth, but it could, is that I see 3 stages in life here. That in verses 1, 2, and 3, I see childhood. Okay, the Lord is my shepherd. You know, the sheep is in our lives. When there is sheep, when we're kids, we're completely dependent upon our parents. You're 5 years, 2 years old. What? Of course, 1 year, 2 year old, 4 year. What are you gonna? I'm gonna leave home. I can't even cross the street without getting hit by a car. I'm a sheep. When I'm a little kid, I'm a sheep. I'm completely dependent. To eat, to be healthy, I cannot possibly do this on my own. Verse 4 is adolescence. That suddenly I enter out into the world and I discover that it is a scary place. But I get some leeway here to go and explore the world. But I'm not afraid. Why? Because you are with me. Your rod and your staff. This is This is, for anyone who's parented adolescents, you let them go, you let them explore, but you don't let them fall off the cliff. You have your rod, you have your staff. You know how to change their direction. You know how to put them back. And they know that too. Though they will never thank you for it until they have teenagers of their own. Then they will thank you for it. And when we come out of adolescence, we're not sheep anymore. We're grown-ups. We're independent beings. And when we arrive at that point, there is a table spread for us that we can come to the table that God prepares for us in full view of my enemies. The enemies are the demons, the ones that I became aware of when I was an adolescent that made the valley of the shadow of death, the valley of the shadow of death. And I can confront my demons, and I can confront it. If I sit down at the table, I don't have to sit down at the table. Nobody put me at the table. A sheep gets led to water and to grass. An adult has to actually come to the table herself or himself. But I see that you spread a table in full view of my enemies. And you anoint my head with oil. You raise me up. This is a majestic idea. It was the king, the Melech, and the Kohen Gadol that got. Anyone see The Crown? What a great show. I forget whether it was Netflix or one of those things. It's television without television, which I'm still getting used to. With television without television. And at her coronation, they poured oil on her forehead. That's biblical.
So, but Rabbi Segelman, so you anoint my head with oil. It's not this, it's not only the adultness, it's really recognize our own divinity, recognizing the divinity within. If God is anointing me, then I am the prince.
Yes. I wouldn't call it divinity because that kind of blurs the line of the other.
Mhm.
Okay. But yes, I am being elevated. I'm being elevated. I'm being elevated above the animal. I'm being elevated above the child. I'm being elevated above my demons, above my worst. It is bringing out the best in me. Okay, that's the opportunity that I have when I see that God has spread the table for me. And again, please note the difference between he guides me, he leads me. That doesn't happen here. All that God does in maturity is spread out the table. But I have to come to the table. My drink is abundant. This is simcha, this is greatness. Now, I should have changed this because this word in Hebrew, ach, is translated here as only. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's a possibility. It could also be but. It could also be wow. It could also just be may. It's a strange word. But the idea here is the same. Goodness and love will pursue me. Think about what a deep thought that is. I'm not going to pursue goodness and love. It's going to pursue me. That this is all part of coming to the table. That, there's an expression, the person who seeks honor will never get it. The person who avoids honor will find him. that my life will be such that I don't have to go look for the goodness and the love. That's going to find me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. Now, that might have meant something at the time when there was a house of the Lord, but I think here we can mean the presence of God for many long years. Yeah, I don't want to dwell too long on this, but I
You don't want to dwell in the.
we dwell in the house.
But I do like dwell in the house. To me, that always signals that I am aware of the presence. You know, I
That's
am.
what I'm saying. But I think when these words were written, Esther, I'll call on you a second. When these words were written, there was such a thing called the house of the Lord. Okay, I mean, there was a temple in Jerusalem, but it's hard to imagine that even if the psalmist meant that, what Kim just said is right. Okay, because that was the same as being in the presence of God. Why does someone have to live in the house of the Lord? Okay, I mean, like no one lived in the house of the Lord unless you were the Kohen Gadol. But just as I see there are two people with hands up, and I'll get to you in a second. Just as an aside, in the theology of the ancient world, God was not everywhere. We take it for granted that we believe that God is everywhere. That's a very mature approach to theology. It comes with the ability to abstract. The ancient world did not have that God could be anywhere, but God was only in one place at a time. So God was in the temple. If God wanted to leave the temple, God could leave the temple, but then God wouldn't be in the temple. Okay, that's why when we read in the Torah portions this week, God was a pillar of fire or a pillar of cloud, and because they could see it, because they couldn't abstract God. This idea that there's an invisible God that's possible to be everywhere is a much older, much later thing. And even if you know something about developmental psychology, about which I know like this much, but I know there's something called object constancy or something like that. That when you're a baby, you don't like when your mother leaves the room, you don't say to yourself, "Oh, she just went to the bathroom." Babies say, "My mother stopped existing." It takes a bit of time for the brain to develop where you can chop that she went to the bathroom and she's coming back. But babies, it takes time to do that. Okay, Esther, who is first?
Esther and then Karen.
Okay.
So Rabbi, I have a question. Why do they recite this at funerals?
Very good question. Because there is no good reason to recite this at a funeral. It's just that it happens to have the word death in it. In fact, the more traditional, this is a Shabbos psalm. In traditional homes, in traditional Ashkenazic homes, it's recited at Shalshudas, at the third Sabbath meal in Shabbos afternoon. In Sephardi homes, it actually is part of the Friday night experience as well. So its actual usage in traditional Judaism is a Shabbos psalm. But you know, when King James translated the Bible, though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, was just too damn good for clergy not to bring it into funerals. But the emes is, it really doesn't have much to do with death. Because
they did read it at my father's funeral, so it was relevant. Yeah. Okay.
In my career, someone just calculated I did 910 funerals, and I think I read this at every single one.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it is okay.
It's almost like if you're a rabbi and you don't, then people are saying, "What's the matter? You couldn't do the 23rd Psalm?" So,
okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Karen's up.
Karen, I was going to ask the same exact thing. So, and I thought maybe there was some secret like meaning to this that I wasn't getting. So thank you.
Well, there probably is a secret meaning that neither of us are getting, but that's why we got to keep working on it and working on it and working on it and working on it and finding new ideas and tearing it up and inside out. But I want to just throw one more idea out. This is not just the stages of life, but it may very well be stages of spiritual development as well. That spiritual development needs to be founded upon a certain kind of faith. In the same way as any relationship has to be founded on faith and trust. A relationship that does not have that doesn't work very well. And to have that kind of relationship requires one to give up control and to enjoy the sense of dependency that one has upon the other, with the full faith that that person will make me a better person, even if I have to get patched along the way. And only from that point of view can we develop out of it into a sense of maturity and a place of greatness. But it has to start, for those of you who study Kabbalah, God began, I mean, well, who knows when God began, but God in our world and in our consciousness, God began with an act of tzimtzum, of getting smaller. And God, in order to engage in a relationship with us, had to literally become dependent upon us. God ceded great power to us, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And God gave us free will, the power to reject God and hurt God, because who likes to be rejected? So God made himself smaller and dependent, and only from that place could the relationship begin to grow and flourish. And we often prove ourselves to our lovers in the valley of the shadow of death, when the time gets tough, when we get scared. And it's our lover who says, don't be scared, I'm here. And that usually is a moment in which all kinds of growth happens. So it's also telling us not just about stages of life, but stages of growth and the stages of relationships that are happening. Okay, need to leave this. Here's a psalm which in traditional Judaism, you say twice a day for the month before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We're going to do this much quicker because I have only one thing to tell you about this psalm, but it's an important thing. I love this psalm for what it teaches here. So during the month of Elul, morning and night, Jews recite this psalm as a lead up to the high holidays. I'm going to read it through with you. Okay, and you're going to think, okay, who's talking? Remember, who's talking? Who might be being addressed? And what is the psalmist saying? Okay, ready? The Lord is my light and my help. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evil men assail me to devour my flesh, it is they, my foes and my enemies, who stumble and fall. Should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear. Should war beset me, still would I be confident. One thing I ask of the Lord, only that do I seek, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to frequent his temple. He will shelter me in his pavilion on an evil day, grants me the protection of his tent, raise me high upon a rock. Now is my head high over my enemies round about. I sacrifice worship in his tent with shouts of joy, singing and chanting a hymn to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud, have mercy on me, answer me. In your behalf, my heart said, seek my face. O Lord, I seek your face. Do not hide your face from me. Don't thrust aside your servant in anger. You have ever been my help. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me. O God, my deliverer. Though my father and my mother abandon me, the Lord will take me in. Show me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my watchful foes. Do not subject me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses and unjust accusers have appeared against me. Had I not had the assurance that I would enjoy the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, look to the Lord. Be strong and of good courage. Oh, look to the Lord. Okay, tell me about the psalm. What struck you about the psalm?
The first part just seemed like a redo of Psalm 23. The Lord is my light and my help. The Lord is my shepherd. Whom should I feel? What should I want? So it took a while before that tone changed.
To me, it felt like the person who was speaking, the psalmist was speaking to themselves, trying to convince themselves of this.
Okay, good. But the psalmist is not talking to God. The psalmist is either talking to himself, Judy, as you said, or he's talking to his friend. He's talking to somebody. And his tone could be, again, as Judy said, trying to convince himself of this, but it could also be what he wants his friend to hear. Okay, what he's telling his friend something about his relationship with God, which is pretty much as good as it can be. God is my buddy. God is going to protect me. God's going to raise me on a rock. I got nothing to worry about. Bring him on. God's got my back. I'm good. Until halfway through the psalm, literally halfway through the psalm. And then what happens in verse 7? Again, from a literary point of view, what happens in verse 7?
It changes person. He's now addressing God.
Now he's not talking to his friend or even to himself. Now he's talking to God. And the tone changes entirely. This is a scared, almost pathetic human being. You don't say, Shema, hear when I cry aloud. You know when you would say to someone, listen to me? When would you say, listen to me to someone?
When they're not listening.
When you're not listening. If someone is listening to you, you don't have to say, listen. But he actually believes by verse 7 that God actually may not even be paying attention to him. Have mercy upon me. Again, also remember, whenever you see the word mercy, and you see it a lot in Psalms, mercy means I'm asking for something that I didn't earn. Because if I earned it, if I deserved it, I wouldn't need mercy. So but asking for mercy means that there is something inadequate about me. I'm asking for something that I don't actually deserve. Answer me. My heart, my neshama is saying, go find God's face. I'm looking for your face. Don't hide your face from me. I don't know whether this is guilt. I don't know. But this is not the same person as is speaking at the beginning of this psalm. Do not thrust aside your servant in anger. I guess I must have done something to piss God off. Don't forsake me. Don't abandon me. Don't be like my father and my mother. I think I don't read too much. I think that this means, look, please God, and there might be people here for whom this is not true, and my heart breaks for you. But the way of the world is we bury our parents. Okay? Because the alternative is too painful. Okay? that we should all be cursed, that we should be blessed, that we'll bury our parents. At that time, I mean, they should all be 120, which doesn't happen, but we should bury our parents. They're not forever. And anyone who's been through the experience of burying both their parents knows that once that happens, there is nobody in the world that's going to love me unconditionally again. The two people in the world who would take the bullet from me with smiles on their face are gone. As it has to be. So don't be like a parent to me, because they don't last forever. You'll take me in, show me the way. Okay, look, at the end, there's almost some very dramatic. If I didn't believe then in the goodness of God in this world, ... It doesn't, the sentence doesn't end. It's unthinkable. A world in which I didn't believe in the goodness of God, ... There are no words that can explain the horror of that. And then in verse 14, he goes back and he talks to his audience, which is why, well, I guess, Judy, you could be saying still this, that he's talking to himself. Look to the Lord. Be strong and of good courage. And this O is really just an and, but JPS likes to be dramatic. And beautiful, there's a beautiful commentary here. Look to the Lord, be strong and of good courage, and look to the Lord. Why do I have to say look to the Lord twice? Because he's saying either to himself or to his friend, you have to look to the Lord. Pause. It doesn't always seem to work. Sometimes you can look to the Lord and feel very confident. And other times you can look for the Lord and be scared out of your wits and feel very inadequate. Or sometimes you'll look to the Lord and you won't find anything. To which maybe the friend answers that. You know, you look to the Lord, but what do you find? The answer is be strong and of good courage, and then look to the Lord again. Don't give up. Don't give up. That's the last message of this psalm. So here you have this kind of spiritual schizophrenia. When I teach this to rabbis, by the way, I teach a class in the rabbinical school on Psalms for rabbinic spiritual growth. And I always, one of the things I start off the class with this psalm, because I say chant from verses 1 to 6 is you talking to your congregation. Because when you talk to your congregation, you have to deliver a message of faith. But when the congregation goes home and it's just you and God, you better be humble as hell. You can't you have to have that kind of different persona, because you're not going to grow unless you can be both. You have to be someone who to another can present faith, or as Judy said, and I like this a lot, my aspiration. I can articulate my aspiration, but I also have to be able to articulate my fear, because both are part of the spiritual growth. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back and talk about depression and guilt. Isn't that exciting? Okay. I don't know what I'm gonna stop the share, and I'm actually going to go away from here for 10 minutes. I just want to warn you, unless Kim says otherwise, if you schmooze amongst yourself, you'll be on the recording. So just be careful, or stop the recording. one of the, we were just mentioning during the break that Danny Siegel has rewritten Psalms. That's one of the great exercises of Psalms, is to rewrite it. Put it in your words. Okay. And then it's yours. Okay. The Psalm, that's what I mean when I say the Psalms don't change us. The Psalms give us the language and the ideas to change things for ourselves. It's not a cure for anything. It is a tool that we have to deal with our lives. Okay, I want to share the screen again. And we're back. I'm going to make this even bigger because we don't really need the Hebrew unless we need it. Okay, we're all good. Can you see? Everyone can see? Just give me a thumbs up or a, okay.
We're good.
This is a psalm, which is also actually part of the High Holiday liturgy in traditional synagogues. It's said every day during the what's called the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. It's added to the Shacharit service, to the morning service. But long before we had such a thing as a prayer service, we had this psalm. So let's read it. A song of ascents. I'm not dealing with that. Don't worry about it. That's Shir HaMa'alot. Okay. You know how, like, if you're used to Friday night Birkat Hamazon, Shir HaMa'alot. Well, there are many psalms that begin Shir HaMa'alot. Psalms 120 through 134, all begin Shir HaMa'alot. Okay, so the psalm that we're used to saying on Friday night is Psalm 126. We're not going to study that today. I'm kind of hoping that you really like this and you'll give us a chance to do it again sometimes so we can see some more psalms. But if we do, we'll do that another time. But this is a Shir HaMa'alot psalm. Out of the depths I call you, O Lord. O Lord, listen to my cry. Let your ears be attentive to my plea for mercy. If you keep account of sins, O Lord, who will survive? Yours is the power to forgive so that you may be held in awe. I look to the Lord, I look to him, I await his word. I am more eager for the Lord than watchmen for the morning. Watchmen for the morning. O Israel, wait for the Lord, for with the Lord is steadfast love and great power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel from all of their iniquities. Okay, what do you think? You like it? That's always like the first thing. Do you like it? You like it? Did it do anything for you?
Doesn't speak much to me personally.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so let's start. First of all, this is our question. Who's talking and to whom? The psalmist is talking. The psalmist could be you. The psalmist could be another person. To who's being addressed?
It changes.
Yeah, but who starts? How does it start?
Starts out talking to God.
Good. Sorry. So first, and where is the psalmist when he addresses God? He tells us.
Not in a good place.
Not in a good place. Out of the depths. That's depression. I mean, it's literally depression. Okay, it's down in the dumps, out of the depths. So this person is not in a good place. We don't know why yet. We will, but we don't know why yet. But he's not in a good place. So much so that in verse 2, as we saw in Psalm 27, he's worrying that God won't listen. Okay, we talk about distance from God. Okay, in real spiritual, the blood and guts, real life spiritual relationship, one can never assume that God is listening just because I'm talking. To assume that God is listening just because I'm talking is a statement of great pride and haughtiness. And the Psalms teach us that over and over again. By what right do I assume that just because I'm talking, God's listening? Maybe God is upset. Maybe God is not in the mood to hear me. Listen to my cry. Let your ears be attentive to my plea for mercy. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit of a hint that I've done something wrong. And if that was only the hint, verse 3 makes it very clear. If you keep account of sins, O Lord, who will survive? Now, this is a bit of a chutzpahdik statement too. But he's got to say it because he's got to save himself. God.
But the Hebrew tishmarya, when the account kind of feels dull and list and doesn't have any value one way or the other. It's just an accounting or list.
Well,
but
tishmor means if you
guard, to hold on to in a tighter
hold
way.
on to them, right? If you hold on to them, if you guard them, if you don't let anything happen to them, and he's saying, God,
Or if they're close to you and they're bothering you, God, like they're getting under your skin almost.
Yeah, you think, Julie? Maybe you're right.
I think it's like a remember. If you pay attention to them, if you remember them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think the language that we would use is regular human being. God, if you don't let them go, if you can't let this go, then who could possibly stand before you? Right? I guess I'm reading, and Julie, I'm hearing what you're saying, and it's actually fascinating to me the more I think about it. But I think the pshat of the text, the simple meaning of the text is tishmar is to hold on to something as opposed to letting it go. God, if you hold on to the sins of people, then we're all doomed.
It's almost like don't sweat the small stuff in a way, like you're holding on to everything.
In this case, it might even be don't even sweat the big stuff. Don't sorry. Sorry, I'm okay. Let's read verse 4 so we can use it to understand verse 3. Yours is the power to forgive, so that you may be held in awe. Meaning, God, what makes you awesome is not your ability to be hurt. It's your ability to let it go and to forgive. If all that you're doing is holding on to your sins, you know what, God, you're no better than my wife or my husband or they're going to hold on to it. God, you're better than that. Now, again, this is kind of chutzpahdik, but he seems to be fighting for his life.
And it says no one can really live up to that. Who will survive? Everyone is guilty of that. No one will make it if you hold that grudge.
Correct. Now that's that, and I said that that if you don't do it, then you're no better than my spouse or what. But the truth of the matter is, every single relationship on earth depends upon forgiveness. Forgiveness is the opposite of justice. You always have to see forgiveness as the opposite of justice. If justice can happen, then forgiveness isn't necessary. Forgiveness is what we employ when justice is not workable. No human relationship can exist on the basis of justice. Can you imagine? Think about your children. Okay. If everything that they did was met with justice, they'd be all over. There would be no relationship. In a marriage, there would be no relationship. It can't be tit for tat. So when we can't have justice, or we don't want to have justice because the price of justice is too high, we have to have forgiveness. And that's what he's saying here, God. The price of justice is just too high. You'll have no one. And what's awesome about you is that despite what we do, you forgive us. Now, between the lines here, we have to read, if we buy what the psalmist just said, then it works the other way too. There are a lot of people who can't forgive God. And that is as destructive to any relationship as God not forgiving us. Okay, anyone who goes into Yom Kippur without having made a kavanah, a prayer that I forgive you, God, should not expect to be forgiven, because why should you? I mean, why should God forgive you? So here he's obviously guilty about something. And he needs to get past that guilt. And as we're going to see in the next psalm, maybe this is the only way he can do it. But in verse 5, he changes his audience. He's no longer talking to God in verse 5. And it's very clear in verse 7, where he says, "Oh, Israel," he's talking to the all of the Jewish people. It may be in verse 5, he's talking to his audience. It may be in verse 5 and 6, he's actually talking to himself, which I don't usually say, except that in verse 7, he's clearly talking to the audience. So maybe there's a transition where he talks to God, then he talks to himself, then he talks to the others. I don't know. I'm just playing. I look to God. I look to him. I await his word. I am more eager for the Lord than watchmen for the morning. Watchmen for the morning. The watchman for the morning idiom is so beautiful because the night is so scary. The darkness is so scary. I'm so vulnerable in the darkness of night. And the morning comes and I can see what's in front of me. And suddenly I regain my strength. And that's what he's saying, God, I'm in the dark. I'm waiting for the morning. I'm waiting for you to shine light again and get me out of this darkness. And
not just darkness, but to make me alive again. This is Joyce.
Yeah, no, yes. Okay. Or bring me out of the depths. And just to emphasize Joyce's point, we say from out of the depths, I interpreted that as psychologically, but out of the depths, when actually do you and I go into the depths?
When we sleep?
No, when we're dead and they lower our coffin 6 feet into the ground.
But isn't sleep supposed to be, what's it, 1/60th death?
60th of death, yeah. So I mean, yes. So when we're asleep, we're kind of, but this is really, when Joyce said, "Give me life again," that thought immediately popped into my mind. That maybe the death is, I feel like I'm talking in the grave. That what's the point of life? I'm dead. Judy, go ahead.
I want to share this book that is a book that is really meaningful to me. It's called Out of the Depths I Call to You. And this is the first time I've heard that phrase, except from this book. This book was, somehow it came into my lap in the 90s when I was pregnant with my first child and struggling with pregnancy. And it is a book written by Rabbi Nina Beth Carden, and it's prayers for women. And in it are prayers for different stages of pregnancy. And so in that case, the depths was the depths of vulnerability and fear and desperation, but from a strictly very personal way.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess I just want to hold that out to say there's no limit to how this stuff can be interpreted. I'm Jeffrey Segelman. I've lived a particular life, and I think a particular way. And Nebuch, you have to listen to me because I'm the teacher, but that doesn't mean I'm right. Okay. Everybody comes to this from a different point of view. I mean, I could live till 120 and I would not have thought of pregnancy, because why would I? So everybody has to come to this from their own life. Just want to, I'm pushing us, so I want to get to the last line. O Israel, wait for the Lord, for with the Lord is steadfast love and great power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel from all their iniquities. Okay, so he starts this psalm from the depths. Okay, now I think that the image of the grave is actually very beautiful, but let's go back to the psychological sense of depression, that his guilt is depressing him. And he's worried that it has ended his relationship with God. And all he can do besides give up is cry out to God, please listen to me, as if almost to say, you have every right not to listen to me, but I'm asking you to listen to me anyway. And I have, when you're listening to me, here's what I have to say to you. That you're greater as a forgiver than you are as a judge. And then he can turn, once he gets that off of his chest, once he believes that God has heard those words, he can look back into himself, or he can look at his friend and say, now I have to wait. Now I have to wait. But at least now I can begin to bring myself up. And in verse 7, he says, wait for the Lord. It's not instantaneous. That's also a great act of haughtiness. You think because I asked God to forgive me that it happened right off the bat? That God doesn't want to think about it? That God doesn't want to see how I act after I cry? God's not an idiot. I cry. It's the beginning of a process. I have to be patient with myself, but I have to be patient with God. And it's in this patience that I can put my life back together. It's not in the final, fireworks moment of forgiveness. That ain't happening. All I want is space to put my life back together. And if I can articulate to God that you are greater as a forgiver than as a judge, if I can scream that out, not just say it, not just think it, but scream it, then maybe I can buy myself some space but I have to wait. It's in the waiting that we will see God's love and we will see God's power to redeem. The other piece of this that I would note about spiritual growth is that it's never, and we saw this before, it's never just between you and God. There has to be another party or parties involved. There has to be an articulation of something not only to God, but it has to be an articulation to other people. And there's really two reasons for this. I don't know whether any of you have ever, and I hope you haven't. I hope, and I've said this before, especially on Friday mornings. If anyone has any familiarity with 12-step programs, at the end of the 12 steps, in the last step, what do you have to do? You have to go preach. You have to go tell others what you've been through and what they can do with their lives. It's kind of like being a parent or a teacher. You think you know something until you have to teach it. And then suddenly you find that maybe you didn't know it quite as well as you thought you knew it. But once you teach something, once you articulate something to someone else, you get it. And once you articulate it to someone else, you put yourself in a position where now do you really believe this? And you have to defend yourself. It's not real. There is nothing between you and God that's real until it's articulated and discussed with another human being. And that other human being has an opportunity to challenge you. And then it becomes real. And we often forget that. Okay. Very, very often we talk, especially these days, and in the last few years, we think of spirituality as being a place of safe space. Safe space means it's a space where I don't have to be judged, where no one's going to judge me. This is completely antithetical to spirituality. No one ever grew without being judged. No one ever took one step forward in their lives without being judged. To want to be in a safe place where no one's going to challenge me is to stand still. It's simply to self-validate my entire life. And what the hell good is that? But if I am establishing a relationship with God and then I articulate it to other people and I give other people the chance to say, what do you mean? Explain it more clearly. Now I'm going to get someplace. And that's what's happening in this psalm. This guy starts with nothing and he ends up as a teacher. Because that's the spiritual path. I'm moving on. Another psalm. This one has a punchline, everybody. Get ready. Okay. I think if you pray anything at all in the traditional manner, even like the Amida, this has a great punchline. A psalm. When Nathan the prophet came to David after he had come to Bathsheba, that's a nice way of putting it. For those of you who know the story, David sees it. You can go to the book of Samuel and you can actually see this story. David sees this hot woman sitting on their roof sunbathing. He's immediately taken with her. There's only one problem. She has a husband. No problem. If you're the king, you just take your husband, send him to the front in the next battle, put him in a place where he's sure to get killed, and then you have his wife. And that's exactly what David did. There's a prophet, Nathan, who is told by God, go to David and say, David, you're screwed. You really blew it. I am so angry with you. You are going to pay for what you did. And this psalm is David's response. So I'm just staying on the theme of guilt, okay? David has been called out by God through the prophet, but he's been called out by God. Now we can get to verse 3. Have mercy on me, O God, as befits your faithfulness. That's the bad translation. It should be kindness. Have mercy upon, chesed is always kindness. Have mercy upon me, O God, as befits your kindness. In keeping with your abundant compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly of my iniquity and purify me of my sin. For I recognize my transgression and I'm ever conscious of my sin. Okay, let's stop there for a second. Okay, first step, I'm owning up. Now, you think that this, okay, fine, so he's owning up. He didn't realize he did anything wrong? I'm supposed to give him a pat on the back and give him a yasher koach for this? And the answer is yes. Because I'll bet a dime to a dollar he didn't think he did anything wrong. He was the king. He was perfectly within his power to do what he did. I'm the king. I can send anyone who I want into battle. What did I do wrong? Be careful now. Because you're saying, oh, come on, except most of the time when we do something wrong, it's generally followed by a rationalization. God has asked me to do something, or God has asked me not to do something. I'm not doing it, but I will then rationalize my act so that I can sleep at night and I can still have a relationship with God. So it's not important to do this mitzvah or to avoid that. That's not important. I'm still fine. And this is exactly what David does. And he's kicked out of that complacency. And he says, no, I blew it. I was sleeping at night because I convinced myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. But now I can't do that anymore. You've kicked me in the teeth. The next few lines are actually very difficult, but I'll give you what I would suggest is the answer. Against you alone have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. And so are you just in your sentence and right in your judgment. I think here, how I interpret this, and please, I don't want to go into a whole discussion about it. We can do it offline if you're really interested. I think he means I can't ask Uriah to forgive me. He's dead. All I have is you. If I had done something wrong to Uriah, but Uriah was alive so that I could go and ask and say to him, I'm sorry, and ask for his forgiveness and make some kind of compensation or recompense to him, then I would be okay, but I can't do that. One of the things, if you go to a traditional funeral, one of the things that happens is before we fill in the grave, the rabbi will say that this is the moment the dirt hits the box, that's the moment that the neshama ascends to heaven. So we're about to send the neshama to heaven. So if you have anything to say to this person, well, obviously you can say it silently. Say it now. That's code for if you need to ask forgiveness from this person, ask it now. Because it will be hard to live with after you hear the dirt hit the box. Okay, so I can't make this right. Okay, I need to, so you get the idea, okay? David is talking to God. He wants God to forgive him. He is willing to admit to his sins. He's willing to humble himself. He says to God, don't cast me out from your presence And don't take your Holy Spirit away from me, please. Let me again rejoice in your help or with your help. I need to live a life, God. Joyce, I'll call for you on in a second. No, I'll call on you now. Go ahead, Joyce.
You glossed over.
Glossed over a
was-
lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I was born in iniquity and my mother bore me in sin or something.
I will be happy to talk with you about this offline. But I mean, for the moment, let's just say, God, I'm a human being. I have urges. You know, he's almost like saying, God, look, I don't have excuses except, you know, human beings screw up. But it's more than that. The Midrash makes more than that. But it doesn't help me with my point here, Joyce. And so
Okay.
I'm admitting that there's more to talk about. Email me and I will be happy to have the conversation with you. Invite me back and we can talk about it more. But it will take us off topic of kind of spiritual development. Here's the punchline. I will teach transgressors your ways, that sinners may return to you. This is it over and over again. I won't keep this between you and me. I will teach others what happened. I will confess publicly. I will share this conversation. I will talk about your forgiveness. I will talk about how this encounter is allowing me to move on with my life. But it's not going to stay between you and me, God. I will go out there. And then he says one of the great lines. I'll do it in English, but you probably may know it in Hebrew. O Lord, open my lips and let my mouth declare your praise. Adonai sfatai tiftach ufi yagid hilatecha. The rabbis took this line from this psalm and said, don't say the Amida until you say these words. Don't talk to God. As you're making those 3 steps forward to begin the Amida, say what David said in this moment of desperation for his life. Adonai sfatai tiftach. Open my mouth so that I can talk, so that I can praise you. Don't let my guilt stand between me and you. This is to counter the person who says, why should I daven, Rabbi? What's the point? Look at me. I come to shul. You want me to come to shul after having my bacon and eggs on Saturday morning and talk to God? And the answer is yes. Adonai sfatai tiftach. God will open your mouth. If you show up and you take the 3 steps forward, God will open your mouth. And you'll be amazed what will come out if you give yourself the chance to let God open your mouth. Okay, this is again the same as Psalm 130. How do I get out from under my guilt? How do I engage in a spiritual practice, in a conversation with God that will allow me to get out from under my guilt? Okay, I'm leaving the psalm. I want to see if I can do. Let's do this psalm. This is a long psalm, but I just want you to get the flavor of it. Okay, ready? And by the way, I meant to say this before. One of the things that you should do is find yourself a good translation of the Psalms. I want to show you a really good one, by the way. It's not exactly literal, but it's really good. It's called Psalms That Speak to You. And it is by Yitzchak Bell, B-E-L-L. You can get this on Amazon. It's actually a very pretty book. This is the paperback pocket edition. You can also get a hardcover edition. And it's a linear Hebrew and English together. And it's really a very lovely, translation. But one of the things that you should do, people often read Psalms. They say, I read Psalms. What they really did was they read Psalms like they read a book. Okay, they did it silently. Psalms are like Shakespeare. You've got to read it out loud. You've got to read it dramatically. You've got to hear those sounds come out of your mouth. But do it with a good translation. The other very good translation, by the way, is the Koren, Koren, the Koren, any edition of the Koren Psalms. This is called the Roar Family Edition. It's my personal favorite, but I also love purple. So the ROHR, the Roar Family Edition of the Psalms. Very good translation. Very, very good. The Jewish Publication Society sucks. Bad translation. You will get nothing out of it. Most prayer books, not good. Not good. I would recommend one of these two. But let's read this out loud, okay? And when you read it out loud, you have to read it out loud a second time, because when you're reading it out loud the first time, you don't know what the next line is going to be, so you don't know exactly what to do with your voice. We have heard, O Lord, our fathers have told us the deeds that you performed in their time, in days of old. With your hand, you planted them, displacing nations. You brought misfortune on people and you drove them out. He's talking about the conquest of Israel. It was not by their sword that they took the land. Their army did not give them victory, but it was your right hand, your arm, your goodwill. You favored them. And you are my king, O God. Decree victories for Jacob. Through you, we gore our foes. By your name, we trample our adversaries. I do not trust in my bow. It is not my sword that gives me victory. You give us victory over our foes. You thwart those who hate us. In God, we glory at all times and praise your name unceasingly. Now, if you think that God is a pacifist, you got a problem, because there's nowhere in the Bible that God says that God is a pacifist. But if you gave up on the psalm at this point, you would have missed the point entirely. Okay? Just to remind you, we have heard, O God, our fathers have told us, this is what you did for us. And you are our king, because this is what you did for us. Verse 10. Yet you have rejected us and disgraced us. You do not go with our armies. You make us retreat before our foe. Our enemies plunder us at will. You let them devour us like sheep. You disperse us among the nations. You sell your people for no fortune. You set no high price on them. You make us the butt of our neighbors, the scorn and derision of those around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a laughing stock among the people. I am always aware of my disgrace. I am wholly covered with shame at the sound of taunting revilers in the presence of the vengeful foe. And all of this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you or been false to our covenant, to your covenant. Our hearts have not gone astray, nor have our feet swerved from your path. Though you cast us, crushed to where the sea monster is, and covered us with the deepest darkness, if we forgot the name of our God and spread our hands to a foreign God, God would surely search it out, for he knows the secrets of the heart. It is for your sake that we are slain all day long, that we are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Rouse yourself. Wake up. Why do you sleep? Wake up. Don't reject us forever. Why do you hide your face, ignoring our affliction and our distress? We lie prostrate on the dust. Our body clings to the ground. Arise and help us. Redeem us, as befits your faithfulness. Now that's a psalm. That's a psalm. That's an angry person. And this psalm gives you permission to be completely angry with God. Because you got to vent, man. You got to vent. I'm not sure I need to say anything else. Okay, the only thing as I said earlier, finish the psalm. Don't let one piece of the psalm turn you off. And read it with feeling. Okay. Yes, Kim.
If you were going to give us some structure for us to write our own psalm, what direction would you give us?
Don't write your own psalm. Rewrite a psalm.
Thank you, Danny Siegel.
Really? Don't write your own psalm. Rewrite another psalm. Or do you want a really great exercise? Here's how you write it. This is what I give to my rabbinical students to pass the class. And then we're going to finish with this psalm. Psalm 119. If you look at it later tonight or tomorrow, it's the longest psalm. It's actually the longest chapter in the entire Bible. It is an alphabetical acrostic, which means that, the aleph, it goes in the order of the aleph bet, but there are 8 lines for each letter. There are 8 aleph lines, 8 bet lines, 8 gimel lines, 8 daled lines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is a huge psalm. So here's the exercise. Get a good translation. Read Psalm 119, and for each letter, pick the verse that speaks to you, and in 1 or 2 at the most sentences, explain why. So you're going to be writing your own psalm, taking one letter from the verses of 1 aleph line, 1 bet line, 1 gimel line. So you're going to create a 22-verse psalm, but each line needs to have a 1 sentence. Why did you pick this line? What's in this line that moved you? So you're going to have a psalm and a commentary on the psalm. When you finish that, put it away. If you do this now or, in the next month, put it away. And the week before Rosh Hashanah, take it out. That's your assignment.
Okay.
I'm not there. There are young people and old people here. There are people who are young and feel old, and there are people who are old and feel young. But at the end of the day, age, please God, we live long enough. Age catches up with us. We don't always have the strength that we had when we were younger. We live in a society that kind of measures the quality of life by productivity. And sometimes aging can be depressing. And so it was for the author of Psalm 71. I seek refuge in you, O Lord. May I never be disappointed. As you are beneficent, save me and rescue me. Incline your ear to me and deliver me. So obviously he's worrying about something. We don't know yet, but he's seeking refuge. Okay, there's something out there that's scaring him. Well, you now know because I tipped you off, but it's aging that's scaring him. Be a sheltering rock for me to which I may always repair. Decree my deliverance, for you are my rock and my fortress. My God, rescue me from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of the unjust and the lawless. For you are my hope. By the way, we have to figure out who these are. But now that we know the punchline of this psalm already, these are the people who say that I have no value anymore. These are the young rabbis who look at me and say, he's Neanderthal. He's not even on Facebook. What good is he? And by the way, there are plenty of people who say that of me. For you are my hope, O God, my trust from my youth. While I was yet unborn, I depended upon you. In the womb of my mother, you were my support. I sing your praises always. I have become an example for many, since you are my mighty refuge. My mouth is full of praise to you, glorying you all day long. Don't cast me off in old age. When my strength fails, do not forsake me. For my enemies talk against me. Those who wait for me are of one mind, saying, God has forsaken him. Chase him and catch him, for no one will save him. Okay, he might be talking about physical strength here, but we don't need to interpret it that way. Oh God, be not far from me. Oh God, hasten to my aid. Let my accusers perish in frustration. Let those who seek my ruin be clothed in reproach and disgrace. As for me, I will hope always and add to the many praises of you. My mouth tells of your beneficence, of your deliverance all day long, though I know not how to tell it. Which is an interesting line. I'm humble. I know so much more about you than those younger people, but I don't know how to communicate it to them. I don't know how to speak their language. It's a dilemma of aging. I know that I'm wiser than you, but I don't know how to talk your language. I come with praise of your mighty acts, O Lord. I celebrate your beneficence, yours alone. You have let me experience God from my youth. Until now, I have proclaimed your wondrous deeds, even in hoary old age. Don't forsake me, God, until I proclaim your strength to the next generation. Your mighty acts to all who are to come. All right, I'm not. You get the idea. How beautiful is that? We're all a little scared. I'm going to stop the share. We're all a little scared of getting older. That people don't understand us. Our kids don't understand us. Our grandchildren don't understand us. Our students sometimes don't understand us. It's very hard to talk to the language of the generation of our grandchildren. And yet we know we have something to say. And we don't want them to just simply write us off as Neanderthal. And this is the psalm that expresses that to God, to ask God for the strength to go out and be a productive, aging person in a world that seems not to show such respect to people who are getting older. So when I say that the Psalms give us the language by which we can express ourselves to God, the way that the language that we can speak to God, sometimes it's to vent, sometimes it's to be angry, sometimes it's to praise, sometimes it's to grow from a sheep to a person. It's all there. If you sit down and you start reading the book of Psalms, I assure you that not every Psalm is going to blow you away. You got to read, like, I don't know, 15, 20 Psalms, and then you hit the one that's, boy, that one's good. Let me stick with that. But somewhere in this book, there's going to be something that is kind of the key to our spiritual life. And so it's been a pleasure to study with you for a couple of hours tonight. I just, again, wish we could have done it in person, and please God, someday we will.